everyone. We're so excited that you all are here. Obviously, folks are still joining us in our room today, but we did want to just set the tone with a little bit of music, invite you in the chat to tell us something that's bringing you joy, whether that's a book you're reading, a person, something you're experiencing that's inspiring your work. We'd love to hear from you there. My name is Candace Stansel. I'm a partner on the Inclusive Impact team with New Profit. And we are so excited to host all of the democracy entrepreneurs who are here with us today. I'm excited to partner with Jordanos, who all of you all know and we'll hear from in just a moment. But I just want to set a little bit of the tone with a couple of announcements about our time together, and we'll be able to jump right in. As I said, I'm at New Profit. I've been there about 5 years. I'm the previous director of convenings. We want to make sure that folks know today we are recording this session, and we're really recording the main sessions, and we just want you to know that. We're going to launch a poll just to see who's in the room in just a bit, but keep using chat today. Chat is like the thing you lean over and whisper to that colleague in a meeting when you're watching from the front. We want you to engage and spend time together and create relationships while we're in our Democracy Entrepreneurs Roundtable. Additionally, I want to make sure that if you know we're going to be on mute during our time, unless called upon, just to ensure that everyone can engage. In your small groups, you'll have the opportunity to spend some time together, and we're going to have 2 small group sessions, about 40 minutes each, so it'll be exciting for you all to be together there. Additionally, you'll see me bouncing around. So when I come into your groups, don't worry about me. I don't need anything. I'm just observing to bring back information, to hear what's happening in the small groups. I'll be your host and moderator, so you don't need to do anything except say, oh, I see her, and keep right going on in your conversations. Additionally, if you have any technical issues, feel free to email us. We'll be watching our emails as well. And also, if you get bounced out of Zoom, which sometimes does happen just due to traffic, just sign right back in. We'll be watching, and we'll let you all in. If you have any questions as we get started, you can always drop them in the chat. Feel free to private message me and or send it to the group. Loving what we're seeing from everybody on their dogs, plants, ice cold coffee, lots of great books and reading, organizations we really appreciate. So thanks you all for bringing in the joy. We're going to be talking about how we create a really amazing, responsive, inclusive democracy, and that's important work. And we want to do that with as much joy as we can, even in the midst of some really heavy lifting. I'm going to turn it over to Jordanos, who is going to tell us about the rest of the day. And again, I'm here for anybody who needs anything at all. Jordanos.
Thank you so much, Candace, and so good to be here with all of you. And thank you again for making the time to join us. I am Jordanos. I'm a partner at New Profit, where I lead our civic engagement strategy, as well as initiative to invest in and amplify the work of democracy entrepreneurs. And in my role, I have the privilege of collaborating with and being in conversations with so many of you. And this roundtable really came about because of conversations I was having with several of you, where you shared with me the challenges that you're seeing in our landscape, the opportunities that you see to create transformative change, but as well as the incredible insights that you're gathering from your work. And given everything that is at stake right now in our country and this moment in history, I just thought it would be such a loss not to be able to come together, make connections, share learnings, and engage in problem-solving conversations. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And just to ground is why this moment in time is critical and why this conversation is urgent. I'm going to start by sharing some key statistics. So since March 2020, we have unfortunately lost 130,000 lives due to the COVID pandemic. We have lost 44 million jobs. And we have witnessed and continue to witness the evidence of corrupt public systems that we have, as well as institutionalized racism, right? That threatens the psychological as well as physical well-being of people of color every day. And as everyone knows on this call, in addition to this, we also have a democracy that is in crisis. Only 17% of Americans currently trust the government. This has been on the decline since 1958. Americans are also less trusting of each other, right? In the midst of the biggest demographic shift we are experiencing as a country, we don't trust each other as much as we need to. We have also seen blatant efforts to increase voter suppression and intimidation tactics, especially against communities of color. And in the midst of this pandemic, we don't have an infrastructure for a secure, credible, and multimodal election process. But these are all symptoms of the crisis, right? So what is really going on? Why do we have this problem? Well, first, we invest in short-term wins rather than long-term change. And what this looks like in practice is, for instance, in 2018, for the midterm elections, we spent as a country $5.2 billion only on campaigns. Now, that is exactly how much institutional philanthropy has spent both on C3 and C4 efforts in the last decade. We're just not investing in organization building or infrastructure building. And second, we have our dominant culture, and quite frankly, white supremacist culture of elitism that discounts and at times even disparages expertise derived from lived experience and community wisdom. This is not to say that we don't need traditional research or functional expertise. We absolutely do, but we must expand our definition of expertise and value expertise that particularly comes from being proximate to local communities, and especially communities that are disproportionately impacted by injustice and inequity. And then three, we have a fragmented and weak democracy ecosystem that you're all very much aware of. One local leader shared with me in our conversations, institutions I respect are threatened easily. They use their mission to leverage and force organizations to focus on their agenda. And then another leader shared with me, it's not really possible to legitimately do the work in the field without building stable leadership and infrastructure. So we have big structural issues, right? But we're all here today because we're either committed or we believe that these problems are addressable. And especially in this moment when the stakes are very high, we need a bridge that can take us from a polarized, inequitable, weak democracy that breeds mistrust to one that is a radically inclusive, responsive, and healthy democracy that builds trust. And we at New Profit, and I think all of you would agree, believe that democracy entrepreneurship can be that bridge. And all of you here are democracy entrepreneurs doing incredible work and employing a range of strategies. And you shared with us in the registration survey just the type of strategies that you're employing to create that type of democracy that we all envision and want to see in our country. So these strategies range from, civic education and organizations like Civics Unplugged, right? And North Dakotans for Public Integrity are employing that. Data and infrastructure building, like independent voting and the people. Grassroots organizing, like Block Wisconsin and Engage. Narrative and media, like More in Common and Represent Us. Providing support to public leaders, like Advanced Native Leadership and Students Lead, Students Vote. Recruiting diverse pipeline of leaders like New Leaders Council and Next 100. And so many strategies that are not even represented on this page. And in addition to sharing how you do your work, you also shared with us in the survey that you completed the unique challenges that you're experiencing in this moment, and specifically challenges related to expanding the impact of your reach, adapting in this constantly changing world and context that we live in, and doing your work virtually in the midst of a pandemic. So all of these really underscore why it's important for us all to be here, and I'm excited for the conversation we're getting ready to have. And specifically, these are our objectives for today. So first, we're going to build connections among organizations and leaders, and we'll get a chance to do that even in a deeper way in our smaller groups. We will learn how leaders and organizations in the field are adapting, innovating, and leading in this moment. We will also assess what critical capabilities and supports are needed to build a robust ecosystem for democracy entrepreneurship. And last but not least, we will imagine what a radically inclusive, healthy, and responsive democracy would look like. Before we get started with our, we're going to kick it off shortly with a conversation with Ense Ufat and Hari Han. And as we mentioned, we'll have 2 breakout conversations, and we will wrap up our time with some reflections and next steps. But before we dive into all of this, I just want to take a moment to offer a few norms I would love for us to keep in mind. First, make space for each person's journey, expertise, and voice. Be kind, not nice. Generous, but not censoring. Listen for the sense in what is being said. Be patient with yourself as well as others, as different people process in different ways and on different speeds. And last but not least, we're going to be talking about complex systemic issues. So expect and accept non-closure. And so with that, I'm really excited to introduce two visionary leaders who are here with us to share their insights as well as reflections on the state of democracy and what we can and must do to transform our country. And so I'm excited to introduce Ensei Ufot and Hari Han. And I'm scrolling to my pages here to find Hari and Ensei. And I see you both, so that's fantastic. So I shared their bios in advance, and I'm not going to go into their detailed background, but just as a reminder, Ensei Ufot is the CEO of New Georgia Project and its affiliate, New Georgia Project Action Fund. Ensei leads both organizations with a data-informed approach and commitment to developing tools and that leverage technology with the goal of making it easier for every voter to engage in every election. And Hari Han is the inaugural director of the SNF Agora Institute, a professor of political science and faculty director of the P3 Research Lab at Johns Hopkins University. She studies American politics and specializes in the study of civic and political participation, social movements, collective action, and organizing, particularly as it pertains to democratic revitalization. So excited to have Hari and Ensei. We want this to be conversational. So what that means is I'm going to kick us off with a couple of questions and then invite all of you to chime in with your questions in the chat box. I'm going to be monitoring that along with Candace, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So to get us started, I have a couple of questions I will throw out, and maybe Ensei, you can lead us off. And my question is, what does this moment in time mean for our democracy? From your unique vantage point, what are the key issues and challenges or tensions that you're wrestling with? And what are some of the opportunities that you see in your work for transformative, lasting change?
Right. Well, one of the challenges is always taking myself off of mute before I start speaking, and I figured it out this time, so shout out to me. Yay. Listen, there's a lot happening right now. I mean, I don't have to tell you. I think the thing that we are being most challenged by is believing our eyes. In Georgia and across the country, we are watching elected leaders essentially take a sledgehammer to our elections infrastructure. What we are witnessing is completely avoidable and can be addressed with leadership, like leadership who operates with courage and leadership who's invested in having a healthy and functioning democracy. For those, many people know the New Georgia Project for our large scale voter registration work, right? So to date, we've registered about 425,000 Black and Latinx Georgians and AAPI Georgians in all 159 of Georgia's counties. And in our first year, and that's over the past 5.5 years. In our first year of operation, we registered 86,419 people of color to vote. And by the voter registration deadline, only 46,000 of the people that we had registered had made it onto the voter rolls. So 40,000 newly registered people just vanished. And when we asked the Secretary of State, like, hey, what happened to these 40,000 Black people that we registered to vote? They looked at us dead in our faces and said, what people are you talking about? Oh, and we think that you all are operating improperly. So we are subpoenaing all of your emails, all of your bank records, We want to know who all of your donors are. We want all of your training materials. We want your your employee handbook, basically trying to conduct a colonoscopy on the organization that's designed to have a chilling effect on the work that we do. And what we learned is that organizations who have been previously positioned, as the New Georgia Project was, have responded by saying, you know, we don't want that smoke. We don't want to go to battle with the Secretary of State. And so we will shift the focus of our work. We'll shift our work to change Georgia and to change the American South to other tactics that don't put us in direct conflict with the dominant power structure. And that is not how we are going to bring about change. Georgia is going to be the first state in the Deep South with a white minority. We're talking at 2024, 2025, people of color are going to make up the plurality, the majority of Georgians. And so what we are seeing is an aggressive response to the changing demographics. And you can't fight the future. You just can't. And so building organization, investing in leaders, creating opportunities, compression points where we get to sort of build power and flex that power, be that at the ballot box or in the legislature, is a part of our plan to win. And so all of the things are happening, right? There's a racial justice uprising. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Georgia is building 2 new nuclear power plants in Black neighborhoods where there haven't been any new nuclear plants built anywhere in America in 30 years. The way that I describe it is if you've ever had a colleague or a coworker that was about to get fired and everybody knew that they were about to get fired and they started behaving really, really poorly, stealing office supplies and shit, coming to work late, that is what we see with the current crop of leaders, that they are behaving really poorly and acting out because change is coming. And it may not feel like it, but we are actually winning. And so hunkering down, figuring out how to be strategic, figuring out how to support our leaders, figuring out how to resource our movements is sort of the challenge, but also the opportunity before us right now.
Thank you, Anse. Hari, same question. What does this moment mean to you? What are the challenges that you're wrestling with, and what opportunities do you see for transformative change?
Yeah, thank you. First, let me just start by saying that it's great to be here in conversation with all of you. It's an honor to be able to speak to you, and then also to be in conversation with Enze, whose work I've known for a long time, but haven't actually met. So I'm really delighted for that opportunity. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background about how I come into this conversation, so as Yorna said, I'm a professor of political science at Johns Hopkins. I direct an institute called the SNF Agora Institute, which is our mission is to strengthen global democracy with a particular focus on the idea of the agora, or those civic spaces, as being fundamental to making democracy work all over the world. And as an academic institution, part of what we want to do is figure out how we translate the insights from scholarship into usable knowledge for civic and political actors out in the world. And I also direct a research lab called the P3 Lab, and we call it the P3 Lab because we're trying to understand how you make the participation of ordinary people possible, probable, and powerful. So people have to be able to participate, they have to want to participate, and then it has to actually matter. And there's so many organizations like the New Georgia Project that are doing amazing work trying to make it possible for people of all kinds to get involved. And I think increasingly one of the things that we're finding is that over the years, more and more of our work has begun to fall into that third bucket of how do you make that powerful, So we're in this moment right now, as we've already talked about, we're in a moment of reckoning, I think, in our society that many of you can probably describe more eloquently than I can. But I think one of the key features of the reckoning that we're confronting is this idea that there's a disconnect or a brokenness between sort of the politics that we see in the mass public, the popular politics, and institutional politics. And they seem to be moving almost on 2 separate tracks. And so a lot of the work that we've done has tried to understand, not only how do you pull people off the sidelines into public life, but also how do you create the vehicles or the scaffolding around them that's able to translate the engagement of ordinary people into the kind of political power or influence that they want. And I'll say, as I was kind of coming into this conversation and thinking about it, there are sort of like two things that have been on my mind that I thought that I would just put out there as starting points for conversation, and then see what you want to talk about. But I think there are like two things that I've been thinking about that I think are challenges that we face, given these disconnects, given this moment of reckoning, given the challenges that we've already sort of discussed. Is one, what are the ways in which the micro practices through which we engage with each other shape our ability to solve our macro problems? You know, so I think that so often when we think about things like the disconnect between people and politics or people in power, or when we think about the challenges about race, about inclusive democracy, about, you know, shared equity, like all these different kind of things, our first instinct is to go towards macro institutions, you know, that we can fix to try to try to make the changes that we want. And those things absolutely matter for sure. But I think one of the things that we're seeing right now in this moment is that so much of the work that we're seeing is challenging us to reimagine the ways in which we can create a new kind of solidarity from the ground up. And what that solidarity looks like in thinking about building an inclusive democracy or a multiracial governing majority. And it's something historically that we've never been able to do as a country, but I think we're being challenged to do now, and will continue to be so in the future years. And so I bring that up about the connection between micro practices and macro institutions because I feel like sometimes people see those as really different, you know? So I'll be in conversations where people are talking about policy reform or electing different candidates or, you know, changing the kind of structures of our politics, which absolutely need to happen for sure. And then I'm in separate conversations that talk about how do we create, you know, spaces where people come together across difference, where people are able to sort of recognize and see each other in different ways. And I think one of the challenges in our moment right now is to figure out how to knit those things together. You know, how is it that our ability to engage with each other as actual agents of public life are going to make it more possible for us to solve some of the big problems that that we all see together. And I'm reminded as I think about that as one of my favorite books I talk about all the time is it's a book by an economist named Albert Hirschman, who wrote this book called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty in the mid-20th century. And he sort of argues that, you know, the logic of markets is one of exit, right? So if I don't like your product, I go and buy someone else's. If I don't like Cheerios, I buy Chex. If I don't like Hunt's, I buy Heinz, you know, whatever, like these different kind of things. But the logic of politics or the logic of democracy is a logic of voice, right? So that if I don't like your quote unquote product, right, your candidate, your policy, your structure, then I should stand and fight to, you know, exercise my power to have voice, to be able to try to get what I want. And the difference between market organizations and political organizations is that what makes people willing to stay and fight is what he calls loyalty, hence the name of the book. You know, I would call it commitment. You know, and so I think one of the challenges is how do we create these sort of vehicles in our communities that can be fractaled up to larger scales that allow us to build the kind of commitments that we need to exercise the voice that we all want to be able to create the world that we want together. And so that demands that all of us think about each other as constituents, as actual agents of public life, as opposed to clients or consumers of it. And so what does that mean in how we interact with each other and the kind of power we're able to build? And then the second, I think, related and parallel sort of challenge of that is how do we do that at scale? You know, like you know, how do we do it at scale? And the reason why we need scale is not for the sake of scale itself, but because we want to connect, you know, this work that we're doing with each other to problems of power. You know, and the way that I think about problems of power is that, you know, you have a problem of power when the people who want the change the most either lack either the motivation or the authority to make the change that they want, right? And so I have power if I have the motivation and the authority to make the change that I want. But if there's a change that I want, but I don't have the authority to make it, then I lack the power that I need. And so the challenge in problems of power, in a sense, is how do we bring motivation and authority together? And right now we're in a situation where very often it feels like those who want the change lack the authority to make it, or those who have the authority to make it don't have the motivation to make the change that they want. And so the challenge in our politics in a lot of ways is how we bring those together. And part of that is thinking about how we fractal, this work of solidarity that we're creating and doing it at scale, but in a context where so many people have experienced institutions of all kinds in our society as being oppressive. And so when you have a situation where a lot of people can't imagine a society in which we have institutions that aren't instruments of oppression, how do we move people to a place where they can imagine something different and then actually put in the work to creating it? So I sort of pose those. I know that they may feel, it's sort of humbling to be in conversation with all of you, but it may feel really abstract, but I just pose those as kind of ways and frameworks that we've been grappling with in our own work to sort of kick off some of the conversation.
Thank you, Ense and Hari. So we have a couple of questions, and I think let's start, Hari, because we have a question from John. And John, if you could unmute yourself and read your question, that would be wonderful.
Sure. I was just very struck, Hari, when you mentioned that there's this part of your research is showing a disconnect, or you use your hands going like this, that the political institutions are going this way and the people are going this way. And you elaborated on that some, but how do you think about, or how do you talk about that divergence or those things moving in opposite directions?
Yeah, I think there's first of all, it's funny that you point, my kids always make fun of me because I talk with my hands a lot. And so they're always, so I apologize for Zoom is not good for hand talkers. I think there are two things that I'm thinking about and thinking about that. So first, there's a ton of data doesn't come out of our research, but lots of other people's research that basically just shows the lack of governmental responsiveness to public opinion, and so, democracy is ostensibly supposed to be government of, by, and for the people, but like a lot of data shows that, if you're not in the sort of top 1 to 5% of the income distribution, then the chances that government is responsive to your needs are extremely low. And so there's research by people like Marty Gillens and Ben Page, where they all have graphs that basically show, on the x-axis, if I plotted the percentage of people in the public who want something to happen, and then on the y-axis is the probability that government will do it. What we should see in government of, by, and for the people, right, is basically a 45-degree line, right? That as more people want something to happen, government becomes more likely to do it. And what they find actually is that the line is basically flat. So what that means is that whether 30% of people want something or 95% of people want something, the chances that government will respond to it are very, very low, So there's just kind of aggregate data about the relationship between preferences, public preferences and governmental responsiveness. That's sort of one level at which that disconnect happens. But then the second level, I think, is perhaps a little bit harder to capture in one graph, but I think is this notion that so often, I think in the past, maybe decade or two, we've seen lots of examples where you have really kind of widespread and powerful instances of collective action, either at the national or subnational level. And people can pour into the streets and express discontent in a variety of different ways. And the response of institutions, whether it's governmental policy or other kinds of institutions, is often, it feels thin, in response to the kind of disconnect that's out there, and so what we see is that there's just like this constant sort of, one of the facets of polarization that we see is that there's this constant flipping back and forth between control of governmental institutions between different kinds of bodies, and you end up in this kind of rule or die mentality. Wherever one side grabs power, they have to seize the other side, it's like the seizing of control means you have to sort of crush the other side in a way. And so it's like that kind of disconnect that just is a self-perpetuating cycle that has to be broken.
I want to bring Ebony into the conversation. Ebony, could you read your question for Ense?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My question was regarding what you said, Ense, which was beautifully put around how it might not look like we're winning, but we are, and just wanting to hear more around, what you think we should be saying, or what are you all saying at the New Georgia Project to folks who are just honestly just downtrodden. I mean, given the times that we're in, we're talking to folks that are deeply discouraged, and I think a good message about how we actually are winning would be great right now, and just wondering how you all are sort of formatting that.
Doggone it. So one of so I think it's a Milcar Cabral that says, never lie to the people. And so that is definitely the ethos of our organization. And I feel with confidence that I can say we're winning. When we look at, listen, we've been talking in terms of participatory budgeting and the budgets of municipal organizations for years. And people's eyes would glass over when we talked about it. We've been trying to push a divest, invest framework as it relates to policing for years. My colleague and sister friend, Angela, I think is on this call. And so, we've been a part of a number of cohorts talking about divesting from policing and investing in things that actually make our community safer for years, right? And now we are at a place where the Minneapolis, municipal government, city council, actually has a plan to figure out how to defund the police. The Oakland School Department, the school board for the city of Oakland, the Oakland Independent School District, completely defunded the police and for the police force that they were paying for. And so when they were talking about how they can't afford to pay teachers, how they're going to have to delay the purchasing of new textbooks, voila, millions of dollars have opened up because people who are daring to imagine things look different, that things can look different. I look at a place like Georgia, and despite all of the really aggressive attempts to suppress the vote and suppress and interfere with people's participation in our elections, we saw historic turnout in the June 9th primary. People are not going to be deterred. It was in some ways a nominal gesture, but we see, the New York City Police Department, or the New York City City Council sort of making meaningful changes to, they say the budgets are moral documents. I say that we're also winning because in 2013, 1.5% of Black Atlantans under the age of 30 voted for mayor in the municipal race. And we got the number up to about 15% in the 2017 mayoral election. Now we still have a ways to go, but we're absolutely moving in the right direction. Hell, Dallas, the city of Dallas is reviewing its municipal budget. And so I say all that to say that we can point across the country to meaningful progress at the municipal level and at the state level. And it is, movement did that, organizing did that, having multiple independent political organizations or institutions sort of committing themselves to the long-term change that we seek and continuing to build upon our progress. In a place like Georgia, we went through a traumatic, very public, election in 2018, the gubernatorial election, and the entire world witnessed the governor's race being stolen. in the face of, just blatantly and outright. And my very real concern was that particularly the young people that we registered to vote in that year, and sort of talked about the importance of the role of government, and specifically the role of the governor in enacting laws, executive orders. In 2018, we registered about let's say 18,000 18-year-olds. Not just because I like alliteration, but it was in the aftermath of the Parkland shooting. And, we had some plans to register like students, high school seniors. We were going to go to some football games. I mean, it's the South. Friday Night Lights is like kind of a documentary. And so we had some aggressive goals, but we weren't going to register 18,000 18-year-olds. Then Parkland happened, and people were looking for political homes. Young people were looking for opportunities to sort of throw down around safety, and particularly being safe in their schools. Georgia's an open carry state. You can carry guns in church, conceal guns in church in the state. And so tons of young people got activated, tons of young people registered to vote, tons of young people voted for the governor, and that race was like interfered with, and that election was stolen. And our concern was that, again, people would be demoralized and dismayed as a result of it. And quite frankly, we are seeing the opposite, that we saw voter registration go up, and turnout actually continue to go up. And I think part of it is because, one, we are talking about voter suppression. The conventional wisdom used to be that you don't talk about voter suppression because it makes people throw their hands up and say, what's the point? Why even bother? We talk about voter suppression, and we talk about ways to combat it. We talk about the problems, and we propose solutions. And that is a discipline that we have added to like all of our external communications. Not that we have all of the answers, but hey, we should try this. And it has sort of created, I think, an opening. And I also think that, the idea that everyone needs a political home, that this is the particular moment where we need each other, where you need to identify your people, your tribe, who are the people who share your values. What in the South and in the Black church tradition, they say your time, your talent, or your treasure. And so each of us has one of those things. Some of us are fortunate enough to have all of those things to contribute to an issue that you absolutely care about. And so as more people are identifying their time, their talent, and their treasure and committing it to movement organizations, or in some instances to candidates, we're seeing it. The 2018 House races, right? Despite all of the BS that we've seen in the United States Senate, there are 4 seats that are required, that need to be flipped in order to gain control of the United States Senate and punch through the brick wall that has prevented real policy from happening over the past 4 years. I can't tell if I am sort of like relieved or overjoyed that despite how evil and unaccountable this current administration is, like it's only matched by their incompetence, because if they were actually really, really good at their jobs, we would be in real trouble. But the truth of the matter is that there hasn't been, with the exception of packing the courts, which is a problem, that we haven't seen nearly as much of the damage as we possibly could have. And so that feels like an opportunity. And so we are looking for those opportunities because we are actually committed to winning. And so I see victories in the progress that's being made on the municipal level, on the state level, and the federal level.
Thank you, Nse. Nick and Uriel have related questions. So Nick, maybe you go first, and then Uriel, you can add your question to that, and we'll have both Nse and Hari respond to them.
Sure, you guys are fantastic, a real inspiration. A question about the federal level. So I work at the federal level and with Congress, and the polling that I've seen over the last 10 years, that includes Obama and Trump, is that one of the reasons why people don't want to engage, either vote or engage civically or politically, is because when they look at, especially up at Washington, what they see is big money special interests, super PACs, billionaires, lobbyists controlling the game. And then they also, if they're in a gerrymandered district, so if they're a Democrat in an R+7 or +10 district, or a Republican in a D+7 or +10 district, they just feel like there's no point. What's the point? So to what extent do you all feel as if federal reform, federal democracy reform, in a way is a predicate to being able to spark and encourage activism all the way down the kind of supply chain, so to speak?
Before you respond to that, Harrier, and say, let's get Uriel in and build on that question.
Sure, yes. Sorry about that. I've been struggling with my Zoom. So actually, it logged me out for a moment, so I can't read my question, but I do more or less remember it, which is that my concern is actually the flip side of Nick's, which is that while many of us are frequently motivated by what we would consider to be good governance reforms, gerrymandering, ranked choice voting, things of that nature, in any case, in my experience within the Renew Democracy Initiative, the average voters are not usually quite as motivated by those things, right? They're generally motivated by healthcare, the economy, whatever, cultural issues, any number of other things, rather than the procedural questions of democracy. So my question is, one, what have you guys seen in your data? So are there groups of voters that are in fact motivated by procedural questions? And then two, either, if they are, what is it about them that gets them motivated? And two, for those that aren't, have you seen any things that work in terms of motivating them to care about such things? Thank you.
I'll be quick, I promise. I'll say that the groups of voters that are motivated by sort of procedural questions are all on this Zoom call. Because besides that, I think that people actually, to Uriel's point, are motivated by their self-interest. And to the extent that we're able to connect their self-interest with the changes, the procedural changes that we want to see in our democracy or in our elections infrastructure, then I think that we can see movement. But people care about bread and butter issues. And to the extent that we are able to connect them and to civic engagement and participating in our elections, that is always where we see movement. I'll give a quick example. Talking about voter suppression in the course of like our voter registration work, we've been talking about exact match and voter purges and all of that. And never really getting traction with our sort of movement siblings and the young people and the people of color that we are organizing with. We would also, again, being in the South, being at the cradle of the civil rights movement, talking about the sacrifices that our ancestors made for the right to vote, talking about our foremothers and the suffragettes who, secured the right to vote via the 19th Amendment. And it doesn't move people. Like, none of our messages, our cool videos, our cool songs, our fancy graphics did not move people on those issues until we realized that, one, like, our ancestors didn't like willingly die for the right to vote, that they were often murdered, if not by the state, by vigilantes who were then provided cover by the state. And then two, that it was much more effective to connect the act of voting or civic participation with an issue that that person was experiencing right now. People will tell you what their hopes are for themselves, for their family, and for their community. They'll also tell you what their fears and their concerns are for their hopes, for themselves, for their families and their communities. And so asking them those questions first and sort of identifying what the issues that people actually vote on has been super helpful and a breakthrough for us in how we do our civic engagement work. Talking to people who sort of were self-identified Black Lives Matter voters about the idea that in Georgia, we select the jury pool from registered voters was much more effective than talking about avenging our martyred ancestors who died for the right to vote. And so again, we are all motivated by our self-interest. In our organization, we say that what is happening in the White House is important, but it's not as important as what is happening in your house.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Very well put answer. I mean, the things that I'll add is, on this question of kind of voter apathy and getting people engaged around democracy reform in general, the two questions that I would pose are, one, is it a supply side problem or a demand side problem? And then two, do you belong before you believe, or do you believe before you belong? And so what do I mean by that? On supply side versus demand side, I think a lot of times when we think about questions of apathy, we sort of say, gosh, look, people are so disengaged, they hate government, which is true. Like I study government, I kind of have devoted my life to it. And I kind of hate government too, to be totally honest. And so there's many rational reasons, right, for people to do that. And but I think actually, part of what we're seeing with like the scale of the protests around George Floyd and everything like that is I think there's actually a hunger out there for people who want to figure out, how can I put my hands on the levers of change and help create a different kind of world? And the challenges, the opportunities for them to do that aren't there right now, and so I think, in this context of this conversation around democracy entrepreneurs, like part of what I would encourage people to think about is, what are the ways in which you can create the supply of opportunities that people need to authentically put their hands on levers of change, to create scaffolding and vehicles through which they can realize those interests in the public domain, and I think that's a real challenge because, and getting back to what we were talking about before, like so many of the organizations in our public life right now are structured around the logic of exit instead of voice. And what we really need is to figure out how we create organizations that help build a new kind of solidarity, that connect issues like democracy reform to the interests that people have in their own lives, all those different kind of things. So one is I would frame that more as a supply side problem than demand side problem. And second, on this question of belonging versus belief is, I think our traditional sort of both scholarly and practical assumption is that people believe before they belong, right? So if I'm the Sierra Club, I go out and I find other people who are environmentalists, and then I recruit them to join my cause. If I'm fighting for democracy reform, I go out and find other people who care about democracy reform, and I recruit them to my cause. And I think part of what we're seeing in the data is that some of the organizations that have been best able to get to scale in recent years are organizations that operate more with the theory of you belong before you believe. So you can show up at a Sierra Club meeting in your gas guzzling Range Rover, or eating, doing all the things that we're not supposed to do, or you can, you can sort of, you create belonging in a community in a sense that people are connected to each other, and then people's beliefs will often emerge and change as a basis of that. And so one little statistic that I'll throw out to you just on that, again, it's not my own work. There's a sociologist named Ziad Munson who wrote this terrific book called The Making of Pro-Life Activists, where he was looking at activists who are on the very front lines of the pro-life movement. And so, and he wanted to understand not where are they right now, but where did they begin? So when they first joined the movement, what drew them into the movement? And the book is fascinating. I recommend it for lots of reasons. But one of the statistics that has really sat with me is that he found that something like 44% of those activists, when they first joined the pro-life movement, were either pro-choice or they were indifferent to issues of abortion. Okay, which should be kind of shocking, right? Because the question is, why would I join a movement where I don't even necessarily agree with the aims of the movement, or don't have fixed views on it, right? And the reason is that people had a variety of different reasons, what he calls biographical availability, right? So it may have been that I just switched churches and wanted to get to know people in my new community, or maybe I was a working woman that had my first child and became a stay-at-home mom and I was looking for a new community. Maybe I just retired, maybe I just moved to a new town. But there's a variety of different things that kind of open people up to new experiences, and they were invited into an event with the pro-life movement, created this sense of belonging around them, and then that began to kind of change the situation where they began to think, well, now because of what I believe, what must I do? And it changed their whole trajectory. Now, these are people who are on the very front lines. Obviously, not everyone takes that trajectory, but I think as we think about things like democracy reform gerrymandering or ranked choice voting or things that are to most people just feel completely abstract and irrelevant. The question is, how do you create that sense of belonging that will then help them understand the ways in which these issues are actually super relevant to the interests that they have?
Thank you, Hari, and say, unfortunately, we're going to have to transition, and we won't be able to get to all of the questions that folks have shared here. But the good news is that we're about to dive into breakout discussions where we're going to dig deeper into what we heard from both Hari and Ensei, but also all of the insights and learnings that all of you have gained from your individual work and experiences. And so, huge gratitude to you both for sharing your thoughts and giving us a strong foundation on which we're going to continue to build in the next 2 hours. And I'm going to turn it to my colleague Candace to guide us in our next exercise.
Thanks, Giordano's. Thanks, Ensei. Thanks, Hari. Some of the things I heard, can we make it possible, probable, and powerful? How do we reimagine solidarity and power as motivation and authority? And to Ensei's point, we are winning, right? We are moving in the right direction. So thank you all for such a thoughtful sharing. And I'm sure we'll send those questions to you all and see if we can get answers on those as well.